So my name is Brigitte Jurack, and my relationship to Newcastle in the Northeast is I worked for Newcastle University for nearly 10 years, starting in 1999 until 2008. I'm not necessarily only working in ceramic, but if I work in clay, I use both mainly hand building, coil making, or slab building. So in those pieces, they can be having very fragile legs, like the foxes I've made a few years ago, or they can be full-size figurative works, but they're all basically done using a coiling technique to start with. So hollow inside, build up, get a good feel for the plasticity of the material, and prop it up as the sculpture grows. If I work with clay, I tend to use heavily grogged clay, which is kind of particularly useful for hand building and architectural building. So it has a very kind of high percentage of chamotte, which kind of adds stability to it. It's very coarse. And I prefer, I must admit, working with white clay. I had been in Holland in the European Ceramic Work Center, and there I was introduced to a clay they produce in the Netherlands called Wingeling, and that's the one I like the most. You can see light and shadow really well, so there is an advantage also in using a paler clay to start with. I'm not glazing at all. The whole science of glazing is pretty scary and incredibly complex, really going into the sort of alchemy, which is sort of relating to glazing. I've shied away from, not particularly curious about. For the sustainable ceramic exhibition, there will be works which are actually mimicking the coiling process to a certain extent, but they will be having like a millimeter of clay. Everything else is not clay. They are skeps covered with a very thin layer of paper pulp made from egg cartons, and then a thin layer of a very fine clay, and then a thin layer of gesso. That's it. So no firing in these pieces at all. They were based on skeps which were used before the invention of the wooden beehives, the shapes. Originally, when they were made by farmers in winter, in low lighting conditions, and usually with 2 or 3 people together. So there's this communal aspect in it. And I think that sort of intrigued me. But ultimately, kind of, when does a skep become something else? That's the kind of question. I have been thematically and materially been working in relation to the environment and climate change and the effects of climate change for a very long time. And also, I am originally from Germany, and when I was studying, the spirit of Joseph Beuys was still in the art school in Düsseldorf, and he, after all, was not only a very influential artist, but also one of the key initiators of the Green Party in Germany. So the sort of idea of the climate crisis being something new is, well, it's at least since the 70s. I'm a carbon footprint champion. So I'm, as part of my job, I'm training students, art students, to become much more carbon footprint conscious. And once you're conscious, then at least you know how and in what way you could possibly contribute towards a lowering of a carbon footprint, which is, of course, a sort of an urgent requirement for everybody. So in that sense, I also know that the entire art sector, that means museums and galleries, have to have a carbon footprint checklist. So this is a very interesting new development, because this means that if you have an exhibition, you need to actually kind of, statistically write down how big the carbon footprint will be.